Welcome everybody for our session today all about GA4. So if you've been wondering what this new GA is all about, you're definitely in the right place. So hosting this session today is myself, Tammy. I'm the Senior Analytics Manager at Croud. I've been here now for about 4 years, helping clients with their measurement strategy, as well as using the data that they are collecting to drive their businesses forward. Also today is Dan, the Digital Analytics Executive on the team.
Hi Tammy, thanks for introducing that. And hi everyone else. So yeah, I'm Dan. I've been at Croud for just over a year now. So I'm a veteran at this point. And yeah, I've been mainly working very closely with Tammy, looking at measurement frameworks and helping our clients get the most out of GA360 and hopefully going forward, GA4.
Cool. So today we're going to be covering key things for GA4. So kind of what's the key differences between standard GA that we're all used to and this new GA4, and understanding how this new data model works, and going over it into a bit more depth into some of the cool new features that are available to you. So some of these are brand new, like enhanced measurement and debugs, while some have just been improved a lot since the standard universal analytics, such as path analysis and segments and audiences, which are just much more flexible for us to use. And so I'll let Dan dive in and start talking all about GA4.
Cool. So again,
any questions, just add them to the Q&A section. We'll answer them at the end.
Cool. Thanks for that, Tammy. And again, thanks to everyone that's here joining us today. So we're going to kick off by just talking a bit about what is GA4 and give anyone who may not know a bit of background context on GA4. So when we're going to think about GA4, I always think it's useful to start with kind of the previous iterations of Google Analytics. So just a useful bit of information. The kind of best way to think about GA4 is to actually think about it in context to what came before it. So just to give a bit of background, in 2005, Google Analytics Urchin software was acquired by Google Analytics, which was kind of the first iteration of analytics that was done by Google. Then you had the tracking code was updated quite significantly and added quite a few features, and this is what was known as classic analytics. This has mostly been phased out by most of the clients that we work with. We don't really come across many people that still use classic analytics, but you can still use it. But that's kind of the first big update into GA, or the second iteration of it. And then you've got Universal Analytics. So Universal Analytics was the third big update in Google Analytics, and it added loads of different new features. And this is the version of Google Analytics we mostly use today. And now they've done another major update to Google Analytics, and seeing as it's the fourth major update, hence the name GA4. And that's kind of the background of where we've brought everything. But I think to put a bit of like added kind of context into this, the update we're talking about now for GA4 is the biggest update that Google Analytics have ever done. So while the tracking codes have changed and new features have been added, the stuff we're going to be talking about today is the biggest departure from how Google Analytics usually works. And to add to that, another good thing to understand is that there's always been kind of two versions of Google Analytics. So you've had Google Analytics, as we've just kind of went through there, which was your general purpose web analytics tool, has a session, user, and a page view based data model. And it's primarily for web-based tracking and has some really basic kind of mobile features. But on the other side of this, you also have a thing called Firebase. Now, some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not, but for those of you who aren't, Firebase is Google's platform for mobile and app-based tracking. And this uses an event-based data model. Now, this event-based data model is going to be very important to understanding why GA4 is such a big step forward for Google Analytics. And the reason for this is because GA4 is the best of both Universal Analytics or Google Analytics and Firebase, and it brings the two together in two different ways that we're going to kind of go through now. And the biggest change on the back end side of things is the new data model. So this new data model completely redefines the data collection structure for Google Analytics as a whole. So we're going to just compare and contrast a little bit so you can see both sides of it. So Universal Analytics, which is the Google Analytics we all kind of use for our web-based tracking at the minute. This has numerous hit types that it collects. So you've got page views, you've got events, you've got e-commerce, just to name the most common ones. There are a few different types as well. GA4 has one hit type, tracks events. And this is essentially the Firebase model that we previously alluded to, but across the whole of Google Analytics, not just app. So what does this mean? Well, it means that everything that we talk about in GA4 when we're talking about tracking and data collection is in reference to an event. And a good way to display this is to think about page views. In Universal Analytics, page views are a hit type in their own right, whereas in GA4, a page view is an event that takes place. We're going to dive into that a little bit more detail so it's not as abstract, and you can see how that kind of translates into changes in the platform. But the cool thing about this new data model is that because of the way it works, there's going to be no hit limiting, so no sampling in GA4, which is fantastic. Cool. So I really want to kind of make sure that everyone understands how different the tracking kind of works on the back end. So we're going to talk about how events tracked in Universal Analytics and then show you how that would look in GA4 and why it's better. So in Universal Analytics, the current structure for tracking events and just tracking anything beyond a page view or e-commerce kind of all follows a 3-tier structure, and that is event category, event action, and event label. And an example of this would be, imagine I've set up a website for my cats, because for anyone who knows me knows that I love my cats more than anything in the world. So imagine I've decided to set up a website for them and I've put all the best cat content in the world on this website. And I want to set up tracking for all the videos that I've put on the website. So when I set up event tracking, I'll need to give it a naming convention, but that naming convention needs to follow that 3-tier structure. So the category might be video to tell me that it's about a video. The action might be play because that's telling me what somebody's done, and the label, maybe I'll put that as the name of the video. So then I can go into Google Analytics and I can see how many people are pressing play on that video with that title. It will give me a count of that. And that structure, category, action, label, is really useful when you've got basic tracking. It's really simple and it's quite consistent, and it makes it really easy to be quite uniform. However, as the information you're going to want to gain from analytics becomes more complex, this structure becomes really limited. So imagining, if we take that example I've just given, imagine if I wanted to know, was this the first video somebody watched? What video category did the video belong to? Was the person who watched the video a user who's logged in or a guest visitor? So to include the above information, I'd need to not only do that extra bit of implementation with regards to the data layer and maybe send some custom dimensions, but I'm also going to have to take time to think about how am I going to bring this all together in one place or report so I don't have to click in all these different places in analytics to find this information. Am I going to build custom report? Am I going to do it in Data Studio? Is the time that's going to take worth all the insights I'm going to get? And that becomes just what starts off as just trying to find out a little bit of extra information about something really simple, becomes more complex, becomes bigger and more time consuming. And then that's just for one event. And then if you start trying to apply this kind of thinking to all your event tracking and all the information you want to get, it can really kind of spiral out of control and become a really, really complex, big project. Now in GA4, this is massively simplified. And that's because the new data structure is based on 2 things, events and parameters. So to refer back to the previous example, we'd have video, play, and cats being cute as our category, action, and label. Whereas instead of having category, action, and label, we'd simply have an event and a parameter. So a way how this particular example would look in GA4 is that you'd have the event as video, and then you'd have action and video title as our parameters that are just added on to kind of the event, which is really, really useful. But initially, maybe looking at that and thinking, well, that doesn't give us much more insight than what we had before. But what is one great feature is that with the new event and parameter structure, we're not stuck to just category, action, and labels. We've got events and parameters, but we can add up to 25 parameters for each event. So we can have a look at action. I've got video title in here. In here, I've managed to add the video category. I've managed to add, is it the first watched video? I've managed to have a look if it's logged in user. And just from that, I've managed to kind of already expand the wealth of information I've got for that one event. So that's 25 parameters for each event that you track. So that just is a wealth of information. And with this kind of new data structure, there comes a new way of viewing events and viewing data within the GA4 interface. And anyone who's kind of used Universal Analytics will know that generally speaking, everything you want to find in Google Analytics is always nested in a different report somewhere else. So I think if you wanted to look at events in Universal Analytics, you've got to go into the behavior reports, then into the events report, and then pick a sub-report within that, which isn't that time consuming, but it can be quite annoying just to be constantly clicking through all these things. In new GA4, these events and the parameters associated with them are presented to you in a really simple top-line level report. You can just there, straight off the side. And then when you click it, you get shown a list of all your different events. So like the screenshot here on the left, we can see you've got click, file download, first visit, page views, scrolls, and session starts. They're all the events that we're tracking. And then if we click into one of them, we get shown a report that looks similar to the report we've got on the right here, which is just a wealth of information purely about that one event and all the parameters associated with it. So not only is it easier to add lots of different information into your event tracking and get more information, but it's also easier to see it all, which is really cool. So when we think about kind of impact this has, there's kind of three key things that we I think that everyone ought to know about how this new data collection and data structure works. So for Universal Analytics users, there is going to be a new implementation that's required, and you'll need a new GA4 configuration tag, and then you'll need to set up new GA4 events as well for GA4 from Universal Analytics. So you can't directly push it over. However, we've had a chance to go through GTM and have a look at how we set this stuff up, and we don't have time to go through that today, but it is a really simple process, and anyone who's familiar with GTM and setting up tracking for Google Analytics is going to find the way you do this for GA4 so much simpler. So while we don't have time to go through it today, it is a really simple process to do this new implementation. There are some really obvious benefits as well to this new data collection structure. So if you've got a big organization with multiple sites, it's really easy for you now to kind of develop a universal and uniformed framework across several domains and apps, because we're not limited to that 3-tier structure. We're not limited to category, action, and label. We can add up to 25 parameters for all our events. So we can make sure that every event that if we've got the same event running across 4 different sites, for example, we can make sure that parameters associated with that event will give us information from all of them. So that covers all the variables and all the information we need. And then when we go into GA4, we can see all of that information in one. It brings everything together and makes it more unified. And it allows us to really move GA in that direction of becoming a true kind of source of truth for all our data, which is really exciting. A cool implication of this new data model is that because it uses the same data model as Firebase, Firebase Analytics users can upgrade it to a GA4 property straight from Firebase, and the historic data will pull in. So if you're using Firebase at the minute for any of your tracking, a really cool way to kind of pull in some historical data so you can start seeing how this is going to look like in GA4 is to use that feature and upgrade directly. And as we've already said, however, if you're a Universal Analytics user, you are going to have to upgrade or do a new implementation for your tracking. So just to give a bit of a summary on everything we covered there, because I know we've kind of gone through quite a lot there. But GA4 in general is the most significant shift in the way Google Analytics works due to this new data model that we've discussed. And this new data model means that all data tracked in GA4 is referred to as an event. So everything is an event that takes place. So a page view is an event. It's not a hit in its own right. The new way of tracking really improves your ability to collect and report on data. And the event-based model that's kind of consistent across app and web allows us to kind of make any measurement frameworks really, really useful. And actually, something I didn't mention is that for anyone who's used GTM regularly, you might know that this idea of events and parameters is very similar to the data layer structure you would use for Google Tag Manager. So this means that it makes that process from implementation to insights just so much more seamless, because it means that once we've done the work to implement the data layer, that's going to be reflected in Google Analytics. We don't have to implement it and then also add an extra step of thinking about how are we going to make this show up in Google Analytics. It's kind of a reflection of the data layer, which makes implementation so much smoother. And the new data model really reflects the old Firebase model and means that anyone using Firebase can upgrade and bring forward historical data. And to anyone using Firebase, we really recommend you do that, because it's a really good way for you to start creating a GA4 property and to start pulling in some data now to build up and kind of adapt to all the new features that are coming out. But we're going to touch on that a bit more later. Cool, so that's kind of the key background on like things behind the scenes with the data structure and the data model. Now, we have to kind of go through that because we are limited for time, and we wanted to make sure that we went through all the new and improved features in GA4. We've not covered everything. We're going to just go through what we think are the most useful ones and the ones that we're most excited about between us at Croud. So the first thing is the user interface. So the old kind of acquisition behavior conversion model, or the ABC model that Universal Analytics is based on, is kind of not there anymore. There isn't really an acronym we can use for this one off the top of my head, but the whole idea of this is that from what we can tell, it seems that instead of having an interface structure where you've got a report nested within a report, nested within another report, nested within another report, that kind of can be really annoying and time consuming to get through. And then the level of data you actually get within those reports can be quite granular and quite small and not that helpful. Is that Google seems to be offering you less reports, but more information and more depth within those reports. So it's easier to kind of get all the insight you need without having to click through loads of different reports. Personally, I'm a big fan of this new approach. I much prefer this way of doing things. Some people might not. It depends on your preference. But obviously, a thing to note is that Google Analytics is still in its early days. So this format might change, but based on how it looks at the minute, it seems that Google's going with a more kind of efficient and simplified approach for reporting to allow you just to get all the insights you need so much quicker, so you don't have to dive into loads of different reports and pull it from loads of different places, or build out loads of custom reports or data studio reports. It just seems a lot easier in my opinion. Another cool thing is that in GA4 is that out of the box, so just from doing one tag, we've got enhanced measurement. What enhanced measurement means is that in the kind of configuration tag that you're going to need to set up in GTM, instead of that only tracking a page view like it would do in Universal Analytics, now it covers page views, scrolls, outbound clicks, site search, video engagements, which I think, and again, I could be wrong on this, so Tammy, please correct me if I am, but I think the video engagement does only cover YouTube videos for now, and file downloads as well. And you get all of that straight out of the box just through one tag, which is just really great because these are kind of common interactions that anyone who does implementation with Google Analytics has had to set up so many different times. So the fact that this is just there out of the box is really useful. There's also a trend that we've noticed for an increased amount of in-platform control. So we've seen a few different things, right? It seems like they're bringing power back to the user interface as opposed to having to go do things elsewhere. And two examples of this are the debug mode that you can use within the platform, where instead of having to QA any setup issues by going into Google Tag Manager or going into various other things, going on your console and then quickly checking between them and real-time reports to try and see how your data is pulling in as you're going through it. In GA4, if you use the preview mode in GTM or the debug extension, you can view the actions you're taking on the website, and it will pull in to a debug report, a report that's specifically for you to debug, and it will show you everything you're doing as it pulls in so that you can check the data it's pulling in as you wanted it to and correctly, and just smooths out that troubleshooting process really. It's a good time saver. And also cross-domain tracking has been rebuilt, and you can actually, instead of having to set up cross-domain tracking in GTM or outside of GA, you can now manage that within the GA interface itself, which again, useful time saver and just puts more control into that platform as well. You can also easily amend and customize your reports. Now, I know you can do this in Universal Analytics, but it is so much easier to do this in GA4. It's quicker to amend the reports. You've got more options to do that, and it's literally just a few clicks and you've changed all the dimensions you're using and you're showing different comparisons. It's so smooth and so sleek, and we're really excited by that. And we also can tell that it looks like that Google's going to allow us to change the attribution type in our reports. Now that's a bit limited at the minute because there's only a few different attribution models that it's letting us use, but I imagine at some point this will extend and soon we'll be able to amend our reports really easily view our data by all different types of attribution, which is going to be so useful if you're doing any kind of cross-channel reporting to look at upper funnel and lower funnel activity in the appropriate ways. And really useful feature. And I'd say, just to give a bit of a summary, there are a lot of features like this in GA4. There's a lot of tiny tweaks that seem really small but make a huge difference and are a huge time saver to anyone who spends a lot of time in Google Analytics. Cool. Now, we're also going to talk about the Advanced Analysis Hub. Now, anyone who's used GA360 might recognize this. The Advanced Analysis Hub is a feature that's available only to GA360 users in Universal Analytics. But in GA4, this is available right outside the box to all users, to the free users and to premium users straight off the bat. And there are some really cool new features of that as well. I'm going to go through some of that, but the fact that this is available to everyone in GA4 out of the bat, I think is really, really cool. And I think it says a lot about Google's kind of openness to kind of encourage you to explore your own data and kind of do things your own way and set up your own reports in a really sleek system. Cool. So the ability to kind of set up funnels is improved because we're not just relying on page view data or session data anymore. We can use event level data because of this new data model to go really granular and set up funnels, not just on those really kind of quite restrictive dimensions or page views or session type of data that we've had to use in Universal Analytics. We can now set it up by event type, which is really, really cool and allows us to go really granular when we're building out our funnels. Cool. You can also define when events occur. So in addition to adding these funnel steps, you now have two kind of different features that are added within the steps that allow you to put a bit of a time frame within things. So you can have the is directly followed by or indirectly followed by, which as the name implies, you're setting whether an action has to take place immediately after something or indirectly after something. Kind of speaks for itself. And again, I know this might not be strictly a new feature, but it just works so much better in tandem with the time feature on the side of it. So not only can you add that directly and indirectly, they've expanded the scope of this by giving you time options within that. So I can say somebody who's had the first open as one of the events, and then step 2 could be someone who's then changed the layout of the app within 10 minutes, which is really useful for analysis, because if I want to see how many people are doing that, and it's quite a vast amount of people, I can see that actually almost everyone's changing the layout of the app within 10 minutes. Maybe I need to make some adjustments to that. It just allows us more depth in our analysis and to answer more specific questions that are going to be really useful, things like CRO and improving app development and all sorts of stuff. Cool. You can also view performance over time as well. Now, elapsed time is going to allow us to see the average time that users take in between steps. And as you can kind of tell so far, there's a lot of emphasis on time features within this, which is something that historically Google Analytics has never been that good at with time because of the way time is calculated in the old data model. Based on the new event data model and the way time tracking kind of works in this new model, we can have more features within this, and it's just easier to use. And it means that the usability of that is better for us and it's going to give you more information. You can also have trended funnels as well. So anyone who's used funnels regularly will know sometimes it can be difficult to put date context and look at performance over time in your standard funnels. Trended funnels allow us to do that. Again, another really cool feature. And then we've got my personal favorite addition into the analysis hub and in GA4 in general, and that is path analysis. So this is basically a straight out and out replacement for behavior flow. So for anyone who doesn't know what the behavior flow report is, it's essentially something that looks very similar to the screenshot we've got here on the screen. You kind of have your starting point as a page, and then it will show you kind of a flow of how users are navigating through the website, kind of webs out. It's really useful visualization, and in theory should have been great. But how the behavior flow tool worked in practice, well, in my experience anyway, there may be several people who are on this call who've had great success with the behavior flow tool. But I found the behavior flow tool in Universal Analytics to be really clunky, really restrictive, and it always kind of led to a lot of issues with data sampling. And I found it more of a hindrance, and I was never really able to use it that well. Whereas the path analysis tool is what the behavior flow report should have been. It's flexible, it's really easy to use, it's quick as well, so you're not waiting 10 minutes for it to load every time you make a change. And you can use a combination of page views, you can use events again, like we discussed before, because of that event-based data model. And I think this is going to be a real game changer because the behavior flow report was useful, but it was just so hampered by so many things to do with universal analytics that really slowed it down and made it a bit difficult to use. Now, this is so easy to use and so helpful that I think this is going to be a real game changer in GA4. We've also got more powerful segments. So similar to in Universal Analytics, we were only really able to use session-based and user-based segments. Whereas because of this new event-based data model, we can now do event-based segments. And in terms of like granularity of segmentation, this puts GA on a similar level to Adobe Analytics, which kind of again shows that Google is really doubling down on the capabilities within Google Analytics and really trying to sort of push the capabilities of Google Analytics as far as it can go. And you can do time-based sequence within these segments. So we've already covered time and how time has generally just been improved through GA4 and the tracking of time. But we can now incorporate that into our audience building, into segment building as well. So I can, for example, I've seen here, step one is look at grabbing all users who are between a certain age. And then I'm having a look in the next step, on step two on this screenshot, of people within that age group who've carried out a purchase within 30 minutes. A really kind of useful piece of information if I want to know, right, how many people are doing these steps that quickly, and if someone's coming to the site and buying something that quickly, I want to know as much about these people as I can so I know how I can target them in the future. Again, the addition of time-based kind of sequences to the segmentation and audience building is a really useful tool. And we can also use temporary exclusions in audience building now in GA4. And this kind of gives us a way to build audiences that are long-standing and dynamic at the same time, which I know sounds a bit like a paradox, because 9 times out of 10 it usually is. Something cannot normally be long-standing and dynamic. But the fact that we can use temporary exclusions in audience building allows us to do that. So an example, like a fake scenario to kind of give you a use case for how you use this. So imagine you're wanting to serve ads for a new product to people who've previously made a purchase. And you want to target people within a certain age group. But you've also had a lot of feedback from people within that age group that indicates they don't like seeing ads after they've made a recent purchase. And they kind of find that really annoying when they've just bought something, but you know you still want to target those users. So what you can do is you can set a temporary exclusion. So I can say I want to have an audience of people who've made a purchase between a certain age group, but then I can also add a temporary exclusion of anyone who's made a purchase within a certain time period, so that I know that none of the ads that are going to get shown when I use this audience in any of my other ad platforms, I can ensure that it's not going to be shown to any of these people who've made a recent purchase, and then as soon as that 20-day period's gone, the ads are going to be shown to them, which again just means that you're kind of hitting both marks in that example. You'd be responding to good feedback, you'd be targeting users in a really powerful way, and it allows your audiences to be long-standing, so you can set an audience up and leave it, and you can keep it dynamic as well through temporary exclusions and making sure users who are in that group can be temporarily excluded and then brought back in at a time when you want to feed them the ads. Again, a really useful tool in my opinion. Another thing that's changed quite significantly is conversion tracking. So I'm going to do a bit of a compare and comparison here, just so that we can see the difference between the two. So in Universal Analytics, previously, goals and the data that was associated with them was pulled in, it was permanent. And goals can't really be deleted. And what that means is that instead of being able to get rid of a goal or just kind of just remove the data associated with it, you'll have to kind of recycle that goal slot and then update the definition, change the name, but you've still got the historical data from the previous goal you're using still within that, and it can pollute the data, and it can be quite messy. And me and Tammy spend a lot of time trying to help clients who often have this issue where they've used up all their goal slots and they need to track new things and they have to kind of figure out a smart way to do this. And it can be quite a bit of a headache really, but GA4 has completely changed how conversion tracking works. So in GA4, we can now set up to 30 conversions at any one time, and we can turn these conversions off and on as we see fit. and we can be completely flexible for that. So turning off one conversion frees up a slot for another one. That slot is not permanently held by something we set in there. And we can also set conversions through the events we're tracking. So previously, there was, I think, 4 different kind of event goal types that you could set up, or conversion types. There was destination, events. I can't remember what the other 2 were, because those were the only 2 anyone ever really used. But I knew there were other ones. Whereas now, because we're using our events, we can use our events and our event parameters and any combination of the 2 to define our conversions really easily. So again, bringing back to my earlier point of that kind of transition from setting something up in the data layer to pulling that into GA to then setting that up as a conversion is just streamlined, because you don't have to make many changes to things. So another additional thing we have in GA4 is the incorporation of predictive metrics. And Google is really kind of doubling down on its machine learning and how it brings that into its analytics offerings, and it's kind of hugely expanding the predictive capabilities. And we can use these in your analysis, so you can do kind of a user lifetime analysis, and then you can use these metrics to build predictive audiences. So the only ones that I've kind of seen so far, and this may have been updated because Google's updating this almost every other day now. The kind of main 3 from that I saw last time were purchase probability, churn probability, and revenue prediction. And we can then go on to use all these predictive metrics to build out predictive audiences. And you can use this for remarketing, to leverage the likely purchasers. You can use it for re-engagement, and you can use it to gain insight into your users. And it's a really kind of useful tool. There are a lot of specific requirements for these predictive audiences. So there's things kind of like volume of data and certain other requirements that you need. I don't have that with me to hand now, but for anyone who wants to know more of that, you can just drop us an email or get in touch with us, and we'll confirm what those requirements are. Cool, and that's kind of everything about our kind of favorite features within GA4 and a bit of the background and that. And now I'm going to pass back over to Tammy, who's going to kind of talk through when should you get started with GA4 and what sort of steps you should be taking right now.
Cool, so hopefully everyone's excited by some of the new features that are available in GA4. But as we've said, this is still very much in a beta stage. So although we suggest that you get started straight away, it's not ready to replace your current universal analytics. So definitely don't think that you'll be able to switch over straight away. There's still a lot of features that are not available within the GA4. So just be aware, because like obviously a lot of the integrations with like SA360 and DV360, although it's in the roadmap and coming soon, it's not quite there yet. It's under massive development, so things are changing all the time. The reporting is just not quite at the level that you would expect in your universal analytics. So although we're saying dual tag and get this set up, don't expect it to be ready and replacing your current configuration. So as we're saying, we suggest that you dual tag straight away. Just get a page view tag set up there, build out your property, and just start collecting data in there. This will be beneficial as well as time goes on, and are using the machine learning behind all this data. You've got some in there, and it's been collecting away as time goes on. And then you can slowly build in and add events as you go along to kind of build up and have it measure exactly as you need it. And then when you're ready for it to be able to switch over, then you are ready to go. Cool. Well, so hopefully everyone is quite excited, and we can go over to the Q&A.
Yes, before we jump to the Q&A, I just wanted to add one quick point. And something we've seen from quite a few people is people who are really, really, in a good way, quite almost rushing to try and switch over to GA4. We're really saying that for anyone who kind of might have heard this and might be thinking, oh God, I need to go over to GA4 right away and sort out my implementation right now. You've got time. Universal Analytics is not going anywhere soon. You've got nothing to panic about. So see this now as a rare opportunity where you've kind of got enough time to know about something, act upon it, and slowly build on it, as opposed to having to rush through a big implementation job all of a sudden. If you take your time and adapt to GA4 slowly, that is the best way to do it. Don't feel like you need to go and rush to the hills now and set up a whole new project to do that. It's not required. And the reason I felt I need to say this is because we've seen that from a few different people who kind of think that's the case. Cool. So we're going over to questions now. Tammy, do you want to open the queue and can you see the questions in front of you?
Yep. So one of the first questions was that within the enhanced measurement, it doesn't include form submissions. And do we still need to use custom events to track the completed forms? So yes, you still will need the custom events. That's not a standard as of yet. Not sure if it will be implemented or added in future, but for now, you still need to rely on your custom events to track your form submissions. Ooh, a few more questions now. Can I start using GA4 if I don't have a data layer on site? Yes, just adding a page view tag and getting some data to flow into there is perfectly acceptable at this point. You don't need to, like Dan said, rush out and start thinking and trying to implement something. Take your time, get a good event-driven sort of data layer in place, you know, have your measurement strategy in place, and then start building it out.
It's better to do it slowly and do it right, as opposed to rushing it and doing it wrong and then having to spend more time trying to fix that.
Exactly. Engagement. How would we report if a page is converting well now that bounce rate is gone? I'm going to let Dan maybe answer that one, because he hates bounce rate.
Yeah, so I am the biggest advocate for getting rid of bounce rate because it is the most misleading metric ever, and I'm going to try not to go into a rant about it. But engagement is tracked through various kind of, I think the metric is called an engaged session. Is that correct? Is that the right name for the metric, Tammy? There is a new metric that they've introduced, which is, if I remember correctly, or showing my bad memory here, I think it's calculated based on time on the page as well as the interactions you take. So it's not just based on one thing anymore, because anyone who knows anything about bounce rates, and if anyone who wants to know more about it, please email me, because I've got so many decks and so many things we've done about this. Bounce rates can be so easily misleading, and I think the new way Google's using this new kind of engaged user metric, I think it's called, kind of gets over the hurdles with that. So there is a new metric that's replacing bounce rates. It's calculated in a much smarter way, and it is a better replacement to bounce rates. Like I said, we can get more information about the specifics of how that's calculated over to you after, if you just send an email to us on one of the emails there, and we'll send that over to you.
Yeah, like Dan said earlier, time is much more reliable and accurate within this new GA4. So you'll be able to see actually how much time someone is spending on the page, and what key actions they've taken. So you can actually get a lot more beneficial and accurate data now that bounce rate is gone, and the new way that they've set it up to measure.
Yeah.
It'll just take a little bit of getting used to, and probably convincing people.
The best question should be not what do we use now bounce rate is gone, it's why didn't we already do this from the start? That's what we should be saying. Down with bounce rates.
Yeah. The next question is, seeing how parameters are specific to events, would you consider this the end of generic data layer events, as were often used when it was just event category, action, and label? I'm finding it hard to think of any setups where you can control all your events with a single trigger. Yes, so this is kind of slightly death to the generic data layer. There still are ways that you could probably add in sort of more generic events, things like a page metadata that would kind of have everything you would need as parameters. You can use it across different events, so you could use the same parameter, and you wouldn't necessarily need something new for every event. But it certainly, I think, is making people think a bit more about how they're setting their data layer up, and having it much more event driven and probably not so generalized, and just reconsidering their measurement strategies. Can I create data studio reports for GA? Yes, there is a connector, so you can start building GA4 reports within data studio. Might be good as well if you're dual tagging, to have two reports side by side, so you can kind of see exactly what data they're showing. It is a little bit limited with the API at the moment, but Google are updating it regularly, so there's definitely some flexibility there. Will there be a recorded link for us to rewatch the seminar? Yes, I believe there will be. So look out for, I think there's an email sent around after the session.
Yeah, and for anyone who can't find it, like we said, just make a note of the email we've got there. Drop us an email if you can't find it, and we'll send something over to you.
Another good question. What if we are just about to start a new project? Should we still have a mix of GA and UA? Definitely. Yeah. Is the short answer there. Yeah, it's still not ready to replace, but I would definitely suggest, if you're starting a new project, to have both of them running side by side, and using all the new features that you can in GA4, but still having that reliability with the universal analytics setup as well.
Yeah, nobody should be ditching universal analytics yet. If you've put time into universal analytics, it will still serve you and be very useful for at least another 2 years, because Google's still got the roadmap set out for another 2 years. From what we know of already, universal analytics is not going anywhere. So don't rush to drop that from your kind of projects and stuff you're working on with analytics.
Another one is GA4 as user-friendly, intuitive as the current GA.
Better. In my opinion.
It does take a little bit to get used to, as the layout is different. And so sometimes the first time you're using it, you might have to hunt for things because you're not quite sure where they should be. But once you get used to it, it is more intuitive. But I must say, for some clients, that's been the biggest sort of hurdle, is just getting, they're so used to knowing where the reports are that it's just finding that data in different sections.
I had that exact initial kind of thing when I first used it. I was a bit like, oh God, I'm not sure about this. But then after about an hour or two, and you kind of get used to kind of understanding the structure, it's so much easier to kind of, you find that everything is just where you want it to be in a lot more kind of in the usability sense. Yeah. I'm a big advocate. I think it's a great improvement.
It's good. So what are the main pros for GA4 in terms of acquisitions reporting?
So I'd say that there, at the minute, oh, sorry, Tammy, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'd say at the minute, in terms of acquisition reporting, I'd say it's at a similar kind of level, to be honest with you. And in fact, and again, you may disagree with me, I would say that GA4 is slightly behind because there are certain kind of dimensions, there are certain kind of things that you just don't have that visibility on yet. Like, again, I could be wrong because, well, unless it's changed in the last few hours, but you never know with Google. There isn't actually an option to set up a channel grouping anywhere that I could see within GA4. So things like that, like it's all still source medium at the minute. But this is why we're saying that you shouldn't be replacing universal analytics yet. So in terms of acquisition reporting, it's probably a few steps behind. And for key kind of acquisition reporting, you should still be going back to universal analytics. GA4 is still in a development.
They have just released referral exclusions as well, so in GA4. So this was obviously a huge issue with a lot of clients in not having that referral exclusion to be able to implement. But this is now part of a feature of GA4, so that's going to make reporting a lot cleaner as well. But like Dan said, it's not got some of those available features and that sort of drill down that the universal analytics has at the moment.
Yeah. That will definitely change over time. But it's just like I said, it's not there yet. It is still kind of like an active demo, is the best way I would say to describe GA4.
Cool. That seems like that was the last question for the moment. Anyone want to drop in any more? Otherwise, I think we're answered all of those questions.
Cool.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for showing up. I hope you found it really informative. Like I say, if you've got any further questions after this, just drop us a message.
Yeah, cool. Thanks everyone. Yeah, thanks for coming along, Tammy, as well. It's great.